Hi there! I just want to thank you and honor you for your heart to love God and love people. I'm truly amazed at how the gospel is expressed in your life as you faithfully make disciples in whatever season that we are in. And so we hope that this series of online Victory Group materials or resources would be of great benefit for you, helping you to become more effective and efficient in leading your respective victory groups. To know more about how to use this material, you can go to this link or you can go to the description box below so that you will be acquainted with how to use this material. Now may God bless you, and may the Holy Spirit empower you as you lead in this season.
On our third week of our Shalom series. I'm so excited to have you here, and this is our home. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. But before we start, I have a question for you. How do we know the will of God? What is God's will for our lives? You know, I've been asked this question so many times, whether that's, should I take this class? Is this the right professor for me? Is this the right job to take? Or liligawan ko na ba siya? Or siya na ba? This question of what is God's will is a question that we as followers of Jesus ask ourselves again and again, and I hear it a lot. Now, I think that this is the case because we want to know. We want to know what God's will is for our lives. When we don't know the direction that God has for us, what our purpose is, it can lead to us being anxious. It creates anxiety in our lives. And so that's why we want to know. Now, you may be asking, wait, you said this is the third week of Shalom. How is this related to knowing God's will for our lives? Well, we discovered in our previous conversations that shalom means nothing missing, nothing broken, complete. In short, it means wholeness. And when we walk in God's will and purposes in our lives, we experience wholeness and shalom. Now, this doesn't mean that we know every single detail of God's will for us, but even if we may not see the complete picture, we know that God does. And He knows what's best for us. And being in the center of God's will is the best place that we could ever be. And that's where we experience shalom. And so today we want to discover, how can we know God's will for us? How can we walk in His purposes in every single area of our lives? And as we do so, we want to consider 3 areas of shalom. Shalom with God, shalom with others, and shalom within ourselves. So these 3 are important to discover because they each have an effect on one another. So first, shalom with God. This is the first and most important. Shalom begins with reconciliation with God. Why is it so important that we be reconciled with God? Because we were once enemies of God. Did you know that? It says in Colossians 1:21, once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. You know, when we were enemies with God, we did whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted. We didn't even take into consideration if what we were about to do would honor God or not. Now, this way of living, it's called sin. And whether we did this maliciously or maybe unintentionally, our sins have created a huge barrier between us and God. And that's why sin disrupts shalom. We no longer experience wholeness because sin disorients us from God and His will. It causes us to seek our own will instead of His. It makes us self-centered instead of God-centered. It makes us say things like, will this benefit me? What do I want? What is the most convenient for me? It makes us self-centered. But when we walk in this path, It may feel good for a while. You may feel happy because you're getting your way. But soon enough, we discover that this path, if we keep living this way, we will never be satisfied. You'll never be whole. You'll never be complete. But the good news is, even while we were living this kind of life, even while we were in sin and enemies of God, God made the first move to be reconciled with us. Colossians 1:19-20 says, "For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, Jesus, and through him, Jesus, to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through Jesus' blood shed on the cross." Through the cross, we are reconciled with God, and we receive shalom with him. And this shalom transforms us from the inside out. We begin to desire what God desires. We begin to long to walk in his will rather than in our own. That's why Romans 12 verse 2 says, "Do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." How do we know what God's good, pleasing, and perfect will is? Well, read his word. You cannot know God's will apart from reading his word or having an intimate relationship with him. And we don't want to spend our entire lives trying to guess what God's will is when he has already given us his word. And that's why it's so important to diligently search scriptures, to take time to wait on God and to hear from him, to spend time alone with him and to seek him. The more that we do this, the more we become familiar with his voice, and the more we long to walk in his will. And not just that, but as we hear him, we also long to respond in obedience. It's so important to consider shalom with God. Now, another area that we need to consider is shalom with others. When we seek for shalom with God, it necessarily follows that we also seek for shalom with others. Romans 12 says, "If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." Now, what does that look like? Does this mean that I'll never get into a fight with my sister, my brother? I'll never disagree with the opinions of other people? Or does it mean that all my relationships are perfect and we're all, BFFs with everybody? Well, not really. Conflict is inevitable, and there is a place and time to disagree and to dispute and even to argue. But another way to read that verse in Romans 12 could be, never let yourself be the reason for an unpeaceful relationship with another person. This begs a question. This makes us ask, am I a peacemaker? Do I bring peace in my relationships, or do I cause division? Am I a blessing in my relationships, or am I a curse? Oof. I hope that in our relationships, we seek after peace, we pursue it, and we cultivate it. Being at peace with others allows us to align with God's will for our lives. What does this look like? Does it mean that I never get into an argument with a friend, or I always agree with the opinions of other people, or in all of my relationships, they're perfect and I'm BFFs with everybody? Well, no, not really. And in fact, there is a place where we can have conflict and even, disagree or have disputes. But another way to read this verse in Romans is, never let yourself be the reason for an unpeaceful relationship with another person. This makes us ask ourselves, am I a peacemaker? Or do I bring peace of God in my relationships? Or do I bring division? Am I a blessing to others? Or am I a curse in my relationships? I hope not. I hope in our relationships that we seek for peace, we pursue it, and we cultivate it. And being at peace with others allows us to align to God's will for us. Because this helps us avoid making decisions or actions that would hurt other people. It helps us choose actions and words that would be a blessing to others rather than a curse. Our shalom in our relationships with others will always play a part. It will play a part in knowing the will of God. Because God can also speak through these people, especially those that we're accountable to. These people who know us the most, these people who we don't need to pretend, but they know our strengths and our weaknesses. And I've found that these people are usually found in our church community. When we are at a crossroads, it's good to consider what these people have to say. It's good to consider if they are also in agreement with you. I remember that before I stepped into campus ministry, I made sure to have conversations with my parents, with my leaders, with my close friends, and those that really know me. And when I finally decided, syempre after praying and considering what they had to say, when I finally decided to step into campus ministry, they were the first people to rejoice with me. It's so important to have shalom with those around you, with others, especially those in our church community. Now, as good as it is to heavily consider God's take on the situation, or to consider how it also affects those around us, we also need to consider the peace within ourselves. And that's the third area, shalom within oneself. Shalom consists not only of outward peacefulness or peace between parties, but also peace within. What does that look like? Isaiah 55:11-12 says, "So shall my word be that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose, and shall succeed in the thing for which I sent it. For you shall go out in joy and be led forth in peace." In this verse, we see how trusting in what God has said and the purpose it will accomplish brings joy and shalom, peace in our lives. Did you know that those who trust in the Lord and lean not on their own understanding have profound joy and profound peace? They know that even if they don't understand what's happening, God knows and will lead them to the best path. They know that no matter how things appear at the given time, no matter how dark or hopeless things may look, God is always true to His word and always does what He promises. Embracing God's will for us largely consists of us transferring confidence in our own capacity to understand to God's omniscient and completely wise understanding. Isaiah 26:3 says, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you." Now, one last thing about having shalom within ourselves. Another part of walking in God's will for us is to discover the way God has designed us. Our giftings, our skills, our talents, our abilities. The things that we enjoy doing, our holy desires. John Piper said this about discovering our calling. "In a world where choices are many, God's gifting becomes a more significant part of God's calling." God has given us various abilities, skills, talents to use for His glory in a way that is very specific, in a way that only we can. And so it's so important to discover what those are and to be true to ourselves and to not pretend or try to copy someone else's giftings or abilities. It's important to discover the Lord's giftings that He has given specifically to you. And as we do so, we will be able to walk in God's will and experience joy even within ourselves. Joy and peace, shalom peace within ourselves. As we seek for God's will, I want to leave you with some questions to ask ourselves or ask yourselves, and even process with other people in consideration of these three areas of shalom. When it comes to shalom with God, it's good to ask, is this decision I'm about to make a sin? Will it bring honor to God or will it dishonor Him? What does the Bible say about it? Have I prayed about this? When it comes to shalom with others, we can ask, will this be a blessing to others or will it be a curse? Are the people I'm accountable to witnesses of this decision? Is my community in agreement with me? And lastly, with shalom within oneself, we can ask, does this decision or action bring joy and peace? Can I sleep at night? Am I trusting God with this decision? Or am I leaning on my own understanding? What are my gifts and skills? Is this decision I'm about to make consistent with the giftings and the skills and abilities that God has given me? My prayer is that as you seek for God's will, as you ask yourself these questions, that when you hear God, you would have the heart to obey it and to walk in it. And as you do so, you would experience wholeness and peace and completeness in every area of your life.